Hi, folks. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to the 12th edition of the Risk and Resilience Tech Hub seminar series. Hopefully, most of you by now are aware of the Risk and Resilience Tech Hub. If you are not, the Risk and Resilience Tech Hub is a public-private partnership working across our four-county region to commercialize solutions for our sorry, for managing our changing relationship to water and extreme weather. We are one of 31 federally designated tech hubs. This is a program under the US Economic Development Administration, which falls under the Department of Commerce. So the three major projects under this tech hub are the Next Generation Project, Next Generation Concrete Project, which is headed by FIU, Workforce and Workforce Development, which is headed by Miami Tech Works, and Governance, which resides under the Miami-Dade County. This, I have to emphasize, is not a research project. Rather, it is something that focuses on a resilient, thriving economy, economic development, advancing startups, stronger national security, etc. Overall, the problem we are looking at is not just the water, it's not just the coast, but it goes all the way from the water into the land. So, coastal defense, energy efficient buildings, clean cement and concrete are all topics that are of interest. Although primarily the focus is going to be on the three topics that I mentioned earlier. So this broad ecosystem and commercializing solutions that can help either improve efficiency or sustainability or whatever are all within the scope of the Tech Hub. We are happy to provide more details about the Tech Hub. If you're interested, you can reach out to me, Maria, or several others in the leadership team. What we're doing right now, the seminar series, is one very, very small part of the Tech Hub, but a very important part. Because the idea here is that we are providing startups, but also individuals and sometimes academics, the opportunity to talk about their technologies, with the idea being that we want to educate and bring awareness to high TRL technologies to accelerate their adoption, to ensure commercialization, primarily in the South Florida region. We want to disseminate information on both high and low TRL technologies to advance the TRL. And we want to establish connections between the various stakeholders. So academia, government, industry, startups, etc., with a major objective being to really, take Derek as an example or the other startups that we've had and maybe have them start generating hundreds of millions of dollars for the South Florida economy. Uh, I think I've talked about enough. I think it's time for Derek to speak. But before that, all I want to say is please introduce yourself in the chat. Just a couple of lines, say who you are, what you do, and if you have something good news you want to share or a proposal that you want to collaborate on, just put that in the chat. With that, Derek, thank you very much for doing this. Thank you to the audience, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Prannoy. Good morning, everybody. Thank you again for putting this together and to the Risk and Resilience Tech Hub. I've had the pleasure of attending several of your events and a bunch of these seminars, so excited to be sharing information with you today. Just to give you a little bit of a background as I prepare to share my screen. Mechanical engineer from University of Miami. I've been heavily involved in the sustainability industry for the last 17 years. I currently serve as the chair for the Sustainability Advisory Board for the Village of Key Biscayne, and I'm also on the Industrial Advisory Board for the Department of Mechanical and Aerospace at UM. That being said, what you're going to hear today is really a lifelong pursuit of finding ways to optimize for impact, which is a personal ethos of mine. And it's come at the intersection of technology and integration. And one of the things that we've been working on is decentralization. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. One of the things that we understand, and this has happened from a lot of trips that I've taken to the Caribbean and third world places, is that access to water and energy infrastructure is either non-existent, outdated, or in dire need of an upgrade. A lot of the places that we've been to and we visited with energy rolling blackouts, in access, especially after hurricanes and storm events. And then water, not only accessibility, but the quality of water becomes a big, big issue. So one of the things that we're looking to tackle is decentralizing those types of systems to make them rapidly deployable and scalable. So again, I had the opportunity. One of the most impactful trips that I took was in Haiti just after the earthquakes. I was there in 2011. Did a trip with United Nations, and we were looking at some sustainable development opportunities in the north of Haiti in a place called Cap-Haïtien. Went to schools, went to orphanages, worked a lot with municipal government. And it was really interesting because, the people there were exceptionally resilient and their ability to come back from the adversities that they experienced, and they adapted. And you'll see it's written here, adaptation should not be mistaken for acceptable living conditions. And one of the things that I'm personally very passionate about is leveraging that technology in order to elevate the lives of others and to give them opportunities that otherwise wouldn't exist. So when you look at statistics, I love numbers, and unfortunately, these are pretty harrowing. Globally, about 2 billion people lack access to safe drinking water. And then specific to the Caribbean, as many of you know, they have a massive issue with energy. A large part of their infrastructure for energy is dependent on imported fuels. So you have two big issues right there. Number one is availability and also the volatility of pricing. And obviously, these island communities are very subject to storms, which are, just getting worse. They're getting bigger. And also, a lot of these communities that tend to be on the outskirts of the large municipal centers either have limited or no access to basic water and power. So when you look at the comparison between the traditional grid, especially in remote and island nations, and what we're looking to do with future resilience, again, as I mentioned before, I've been a big proponent of decentralization for the last 15 years, and that's something that you're going to see a little more today. We find that, the ability to decentralize and then distribute at local nodes becomes much more effective, much more efficient. Not only that, with the deployability of the systems, you now deal with a situation where you can move the resources as needed. When you're dealing with storms and not just everyday operations, recovery becomes a lot quicker. So you can take solar, you can take power, you can take water, and you can deploy it at the site of need. Resource independence is a massive one. Anytime that you're tying in infrastructure to the grid, we're very blessed. We're very fortunate living where we are and experiencing what we do in terms of the reliability. But a lot of these markets we're looking to serve don't have that, and they're very dependent on resources such as fuel. So we kind of remove that variable from the equation and put some certainty into the hands of the municipalities. And again, the big shift from going reactive to preventative with the applications of technologies with these. So that's when we had the impetus to create Blue Currents. And for the last 9 years, I've been working in the modified shipping container industry. I've done everything from homes to medical clinics, water purification, battery storage. You name it, we've done it out of shipping containers. And I love the platform because it's almost like Legos. I had a huge fascination with that toy when I was a child, and I still do, and kind of took the engineering background and mixed it with my experience with the containers to develop what you're going to see today. We have done a number of things, but the focus on Blue Currents is to provide two main things. It's power and water, and to have that completely independent of grid tie. So the design footprint is a 10-foot shipping container. Now, obviously, when you look at shipping containers, they come in 10, 20, and 40-foot configurations. We had initially started off with a 20-foot, but then shrunk down to 10 because we realized that the target market that we're looking to serve with these remote communities tend to have limited or no infrastructure, such as roads, which limits access for cranes. With a 10-foot container, you could potentially, not potentially, you could lift this with a forklift. You could potentially lift this with a strong team of 10 men. With the equipment that's inside, we're dealing with desalination. These are, systems that were designed for the yachting and marine industry, so they're very small footprint, low energy consumption, high output. So within that 10-foot container, we're able to produce up to 1,800 gallons of water per day. When you look at the solar and battery array, we've done calculations to be able to rely 100% on renewables for powering this water system. So there's no necessity for a backup generator or any grid tie whatsoever. And we've also calculated, autonomy for 2 days. So in case there's cloud cover or whatever happens, the batteries will be able to store and process that desal system in order to keep the water coming. You'll see the bottom picture on the left is the type of solar deployment that we're looking to do. These are, product proven market proven products that have been deployed. This is one of the projects that we did in the Exumas. And with this type of system, especially with areas that are prone to disasters, it's easy to take that system, which acts like an accordion, fold it up and put it in the container, and then the equipment is safe. When you have hard mounted solar, it's fantastic that you have that, but again, it becomes a risk for damage during a storm. We eliminate that risk by being able to pack everything within that 10-foot container. And of course, you can see here these specifics with the energy for the solar and the battery. And again, if you take these numbers and you multiply them out, say you start with a single 10, but then the development increases, all you have to do is add one or two more pods and you double and triple the capacity of the power and the water. The other thing that I will mention is that you have the flexibility to be able to alter between power and water. So the power was designed specifically to offset the energy requirements for water production. But if you're at peak water production, you don't need any more. You can shift and use the power that's generated with the solar and the battery in order to power other systems. So again, essentially what we're doing is we're taking renewable energy with the solar and the battery, storing that and deploying that energy to feed into the power system for your desal. I do say desal because one of our target audiences is communities that are very coastal. However, that being said, we do have the flexibility to change out the water component where we can do a simple reverse osmosis if we're dealing with a community that's maybe by a river or a lake that has access to fresh water versus salt. We can also do systems that are spec'd to brackish water, and we can even integrate for atmospheric water generation. For those of you that may be unfamiliar with that technology, it's essentially a modified dehumidifier, and it extracts the humidity in the air, purifies it, and produces potable water. It's an option. Energy requirements are much more stringent. They're higher, so the amount of solar and battery footprint needed tends to increase significantly, which is why we focused on the desal, but it's something that we can go ahead and integrate into the system. And again, the whole purpose behind this is to really build this system where we're offering a resilient community solution for these communities that don't have access or very limited access to basic energy and water. So in particular, the Caribbean, which is our core market, there's some statistics that are just incredible. You have a chance to read through these. I was doing some research the other day, and I came across a number that just blew my mind. It says daily on a global scale, women and children spend 250 million hours going and finding fresh water. And that just, it kind of stopped me in my tracks because you hear some of these and you read some of these statistics and they are jaw-dropping, but to hear something like that, I mean, it's incredible. And you see the pictures, you see the images of people and children walking to remote sources miles away in order to get fresh water. We have the opportunity to bring that to their backyard. In the Caribbean, 70% of people live along the coast, which is a massive percentage of the population. When you look at water loss because of outdated infrastructure, you have leaks, you have cracked pipes. When you're dealing with transmission of that water, there's nearly a 50% loss of source to the sink when you're going to the end user. And obviously, there's an energy requirement tied to that because you have to pump it. So not only are you losing the water, but then energy that could potentially be repurposed for something else is being spent on a resource that's just being lost. By 2025, or sorry, that should say 2030, annual climate costs of $22 billion in response to number one, simply outdated infrastructure, and number two, preparing for sustainable development in resilience efforts, to bolster infrastructure and get it ready for hurricanes and storm events. 40% of utility costs are tied to water treatment, very energy intensive. And again, a lot of these communities don't rely on renewables. They're dependent on that, that shift in fuel source, which drives up costs. And of course, as you know, the Caribbean is heavily dependent on tourism for their GDPs. So, with those large numbers, we want to make sure that we provide the tools necessary, not only for industry, but also for people in simple communities to stay up and running in the event of storms and just regular lifestyle. So one of the big things, as I mentioned, is I'm huge on impact. How can I help? How can I leverage technology to improve the quality of lives for people? And one of the things that really stuck out in my mind is that infrastructure is about people. At the end of the day, our goal, especially those in the technology industry and with the resources that we have, with access to technology, with funding, if there's a way for us to leverage those solutions and elevate the quality of life, that's huge. And you look at some of these, these three things and putting these into perspective, I can read you tech specs on what the energy will be, what the water will be, and those are all amazing. But when you read here what these potential implications or what these implementations represent, they're huge. Every gallon produced represents health. As many of you know, there are massive health risks associated with lack of access to clean water. We can potentially eliminate a majority of those life threats. Every kilowatt generated represents continuity. When I was on that trip in Haiti, I stayed on the UN base, and every night there was a 10-year-old girl that would stand outside the base under the light for the security. And I asked one of the guards, I said, "What is she doing here?" He said, "Well, she lives 5 miles down the road. When she gets home from school, she has to take care of her two younger siblings because her parents are at work. And then by the time the parents get home and she's able to do homework, there's no electricity in the house. So she walks another 5 miles to the UN base and uses the light of the security guard station to do her homework." So, if we have the chance to integrate light and water and power to elevate the quality of lives for these people, what greater calling? I gave a presentation back at the Resilience 365 conference a couple of months ago as part of the Risk and Resilience Tech Hub exposure to a bunch of the local startups. And they asked why South Florida. I moved here about 30 years ago, and this place is absolutely incredible. Being an alum of UM, I always look for opportunities to give back to the local educational community. One of the things that we would like to do is get involved with the local universities and offer internship opportunities, potential employment opportunities for people who are graduating from science and tech related fields. And not only that, but we're at ground zero for climate change and storms. So, to have a solution that is designed specifically for the type of environment that we work in and with the surrounding community in the Caribbean and Latin America that we're looking to serve, it's the perfect launch point. We're not coming from somewhere up in Canada that is looking to solve a problem that we're not experienced with. These are things that we go through on a daily basis and we experience firsthand. So leveraging not only the technology, but the experience, we feel is a beautiful opportunity to change some lives. So right now, as I mentioned, Blue Currents is a startup. I do have another company that has been in the sustainability realm for the last 17 years. But one of the things that we're looking to do is take the technology and find opportunities for these pilot projects. So, we're looking for people that may have a connection to a community in Jamaica, in Haiti, in the Dominican Republic that could use something like this. Maybe it's a small community, maybe it's a school, maybe it's a hospital. And obviously, that ties into the bigger picture of strategic partnerships. One of the parts of the platform that we do is sponsor deployments where we co-brand a unit that is sent to a school, for example, in Jamaica. And we create this beautiful story behind it where there are pictures and videos of the deployment. We have interviews and we have testimonials from the people that live within that community that are impacted. And we provide this real inspiring and transparent image of what the implications and what the benefits are, what the values and the benefits are to the people that we're impacting through these partnerships. When you take a step back, and I know I'm focusing a lot of my discussion on philanthropic work and third world applications, but when you talk about regional development here in South Florida, we see a massive niche to fit with emergency response and disaster relief. When you have the ability to drop in a pod that's able to produce power and water on site where needed, that's a game changer. Obviously, backup generators are fantastic. We live in a place where we have decent access to fuel. But if we can decentralize and disconnect and have be completely off grid, that's a huge advantage. And when you look at the bigger picture for sustainable development, I've dealt a lot with emergency response efforts, especially here in Key Biscayne, where I live, and I'm actively involved with the municipal government. And many of you know, when you go through hurricanes, one of the first things to go off the shelf is water. So when you have something like desal or reverse osmosis to provide clean water, and then you have a distribution system, you also eliminate plastic, and plastic becomes a massive issue after storms and after events. Where and most of the time, because you're in a disaster situation, you're in recovery mode, you're not really focusing on the secondary and tertiary elements like recycling. We know that, I'm preaching to the crowd where I know everybody, practices and has that at their forefront of their mind. But when you're dealing with protecting your home and recovering from a natural disaster, the last thing you're thinking about is, okay, where do I put this plastic bottle? So when we talk about regional deployment, we have the opportunity to potentially eliminate that also. When we talk about institutional and global adoption, pilot projects with universities. Maybe these become opportunities, as an example, with University of Miami and FIU, to deploy a unit on campus that not only has the benefit of producing fresh water and power, but also becomes an educational tool where you have engineering, you have life sciences, you have environmental engineering. They have hands-on opportunities to technology that potentially they could deploy in other places. So what we've done is we've developed this platform of how to get involved. Number one, you can obviously, pay for the deployment of a specific pod, which we call the Trident One for a 10-foot container. Again, if you have a special community, if you're in touch with anybody, if you've done work in the past, and there's a need that we can fulfill, you can, have that deployment. Number two is the sponsorship, as I mentioned, where we do co-branding and we provide, all the marketing collateral for you to share with your customers and your social networks, so they can see the impact that you're having. And then the other one, the third level, tier three, is partnerships where you do assist with deployment, but then there's also collaborations for pilots, municipal involvement, multiple deployment programs, and also getting people involved with those deployments to offer, it could be community service, it could be internship opportunities, potential employment. So we're very flexible. Obviously, our goal is, again, to optimize for impact. So we want to work with people who do want to get involved to whatever level and capacity they're willing and able. And obviously to share this information with as many people as possible so we can have the benefit of deploying this as often and as into as many places as needed. So again, going back to the whole concept of the whole infrastructure thing, we don't see this as larger. We see this as decentralized. Having the flexibility, the mobility, the versatility to move things, to scale them, and also the flexibility to shift between water and power offers a lot of opportunities for growth. And when you look at sustainable development as a whole, two of the core pillars are going to be how do you power it and how do you provide water? And, those are the two essential things. With those, you can solve a lot of problems. From here, you can scale to agricultural applications. You can start now talking about industry because you can power industry. Maybe potentially local manufacturing. Waste treatment on islands is a huge deal because they have limited space. So, this is the core functioning component with the power and the water. But then again, having a bigger picture where, okay, we take this technology, where do we go from there and how do we build in order to make things more resilient moving forward? So with that, I will stop my presentation and take any questions you may have.